My mother didn't soften her tone. She placed her spoon aside, met my eyes directly and said, "Your sister is coming with her 2 kids to live here. You need to go. You leech." The word struck the table harder than the dish she shoved away. I blinked once. "You're kidding, right?" She actually let out a laugh. "No, I mean it." Henry kept his gaze down. The light above us flickered, as if it understood something I still hadn't grasped. My father's chair remained empty. With it, my position in that house disappeared. I didn't protest. I didn't crumble. I simply stayed seated, my palm cooling against the glass, already mapping out the silence that would follow. The first time I realized what place meant in my family, I was 9. Ivy spilled a pitcher of juice across the living room carpet, a bright stain blooming into the fibers. And before the liquid even finished spreading, my mother's voice sliced through the air. "Elena, get towels." Ivy stood behind her, dry and spotless, her fingers tucked neatly out of sight. I scrubbed until my arms throbbed. No one thanked me. That was the pattern, my labor, her innocence. It didn't bother me then. Children don't define their roles. They simply grow inside them. But the years sharpened everything. Ivy became the girl who drifted, gathered emergencies, returned only when praise or relief waited for her. I became the quiet one, the steady one, the useful one, the daughter who filled the gaps so no one else had to notice them. When my father fell sick, the pattern stiffened. I learned to warm soup without waking him, to fold laundry in the dim hallway so the machine wouldn't disturb his sleep. Ivy called sometimes, promising visits that almost never materialized. When he died, she appeared just long enough to weep into our mother's shoulder and leave before the casserole dishes cooled. I stayed, not because of duty, though that word shadowed me, but because silence had already shaped itself around my life. My mother drifted through the house like a loose thread, fragile in ways she never spoke aloud, and I filled the spaces beside her. I drove her to appointments, handled bills, cooked meals, sorted medications. I told myself it was temporary, that grief required scaffolding. Months became 3 years. In that time, the house seemed to shrink around us. The yellow kitchen light hummed faintly. The bulb over the sink flickered most evenings. The wooden cabinet door never shut all the way after the hinge loosened. I fixed the small things without being asked. Maintenance no one notices until it stops being done. My mother noticed only when Ivy called. Those were the rare nights when the old phone rang sharply and her voice brightened in a way it never did for me. She'd close her bedroom door, and I'd hear the soft rhythm of her laughter drifting down the hall. Afterward, she moved lighter, restless, shifting things around the house as if preparing for a visit. She never confirmed. Once I found my childhood photo albums stacked in the garage, their pages slightly warped from the cold. She didn't remember putting them there. Still, I told myself I was imagining it. Families bend under grief. They reshape unevenly. My job was to steady the weight. What I recall most from those years isn't the fatigue. It's the quiet moments. The 2 of us eating soup at the counter with only half the lights on, the ones we kept dim because bright bulbs worsened her headaches. She would rest her hand on the table, as if gauging the room's temperature. Those evenings felt almost like peace. But patterns don't undo themselves. They deepen. When I came home early one afternoon and found her sorting my dresser, folding my clothes into tidy stacks as though preparing them for someplace else, I didn't ask why. She gave no explanation. The room smelled faintly of detergent and cold air. She stared at the empty space she'd cleared in the drawer, not at me. That was the day I would later realize my place had never really belonged to me. It happened on a Wednesday evening, the kind of still night when the house usually settled into its quiet hum. I'd just gotten home from work, my tote still over my shoulder, the cold air clinging to my sleeves. My mother stood at the counter with 2 mugs, steam threading between us. For a second I thought she had waited for me. Then she spoke. "Ivy called," she said almost casually. "She's moving back. She and the kids need a stable place." Her tone was calm, almost practiced. That I set my keys down. The metal clicked against the tile. "Okay," I said slowly, expecting the rest of the explanation. Something about shifting rooms, making space, something reasonable. But she didn't meet my eyes when she went on. "She'll take your room." The words fell cleanly, without emphasis, like a small administrative update she'd forgotten to mention earlier. I felt the familiar weight of silence settle in my chest. I'm still living here, I said. Not loudly, just stating a fact. My mother finally turned toward me. Her expression didn't shift. You're 33, Elena. It's time you started your own life. Ivy can't handle 2 kids alone. They need this house more than you do. There was no cruelty in her voice, just the smooth confidence of someone announcing a rule she assumed I already understood. But something inside me tilted, as if part of the floor had quietly lowered. You're joking, right? I heard myself say. The words slipped out softer than I meant, almost a breath. She laughed. Not harsh, not loud, just dismissive. No, I'm serious. The mug in her hand clinked lightly against the counter, a sound too sharp for the quiet kitchen. Henry walked in from the hallway then, glancing between us before nodding at her choice, as if he'd supported it all along. No one looked at my face. No one waited for my reaction. In that moment, the years folded in on themselves. The phone calls behind closed doors, the shifting of my things, the pamphlets left on the table, the quiet rearranging of drawers. None of it accidental. Each piece pointing straight to this. I stayed still, my palm pressed flat to the cool counter, taking one slow breath to steady the ache in my ribs. I see, was all I said. And that was the moment the part of me that had spent a lifetime accommodating finally went still. I didn't pack that night. I didn't slam doors or demand explanations. I did what I had always done in that house. Moved quietly. Listened to the sounds between the sounds, the hum of the heater, the faint clicking of the hallway light, my mother rinsing her mug as if our conversation had left no trace. I sat at the kitchen table long after she went upstairs. The chair across from me, the one my father used to take, felt impossibly empty. That emptiness steadied me. It reminded me what silence becomes when it is finally chosen, not forced. Morning. I had a plan. I woke before sunrise, the sky still bruised blue across the neighborhood. My movements were steady, almost ritualistic. I brewed a small pot, not for comfort but for clarity, and set my toad on the table. Inside it, I placed the things that mattered. My identification, the payments I'd handled for the house over the past 3 years, the bills I'd covered, the records of repairs I'd paid for. Paper after paper, each one a ledger of invisibility. 6:12 a.m. I opened my laptop in the dim light and logged into the shared account my mother and I used for household expenses. My hands didn't shake, though something inside me did. Something old, worn thin. The numbers loaded slowly, line by line, until I saw it again. The irregular withdrawal, money gone without a word. Not the amount but the assumption behind it, that what I earned was hers to redirect. I exhaled once, long and even. Then I opened a new account at a different bank with a few clicks. The transfer of my remaining savings was quiet, almost gentle, a simple shift of digital decimals, but it felt like a door closing. Softly behind me. By 7, the house was awake. I heard Henry's steps in the hallway, the 2 loud throat clears he always made before entering a room. I didn't greet him. Instead, I stood at the counter, arranging receipts into folders. He looked at me for a moment, then walked past without asking anything. That indifference steadied me more than he knew. It confirmed how invisible I had become, and how easy leaving would be when no one was looking at me to begin with. Before leaving for work, I walked slowly through the house. I wasn't sentimental. I wasn't grieving. I was observing, gathering data, scanning the space the way I did spreadsheets. The loose cabinet hinge, the draft near the back door, the pile of mail on the console table addressed mostly to me. All the minor tasks that kept this house running quietly, like a machine no one noticed until it stopped. I left them all exactly as they were. At the office, I said nothing about the night before. Instead, during lunch I stepped outside into the crisp air and called Adele, the attorney Mira had recommended months ago, when she joked that I needed legal armor for the way my family operated. Back then I'd laughed. Now her number felt like a lifeline. Adele's voice was steady as ever, careful with specifics. I told her the essentials. She asked pointed questions. I answered each one, hearing myself grow sharper with every response. You've contributed substantially to the household, she said. Document everything. Keep your records close. And Elena, do not leave without formal notice unless it is by your choosing and on your terms. My choice, I repeated, letting the words sink somewhere deep. By the time I sat back at my desk, the plan had form. That evening I started packing. Not into boxes but into exits. I moved slowly, deliberately, like someone folding away a winter coat for the season. I began with the necessary things kept in plain sight. Closed books, the folder of payments. I touched nothing in the room loudly enough to draw attention. Every item that went into my tote or suitcase was chosen with intention, leaving no sign I'd already begun to leave later that night. While my mother and Henry watched TV in the living room, I walked past them quietly, keys in hand. "Working late?" my mother asked without lifting her eyes from the screen. "Yes," I said. It wasn't a lie. I was working on the part of my life she no longer got to revise. I drove to Mira's apartment, where she waited with her usual dry humor and 2 storage bins she insisted I take. "You're not running," she said. "You're reclaiming." The words didn't soothe me. They clarified me. Over the next 3 days I built a private architecture of departure. During my lunch breaks, I toured small apartments around Seattle's quieter neighborhoods, each one a blank landscape free from inherited expectations. On Friday, I signed a lease for a 1-bedroom with wide windows and a view of trees instead of people. The simplicity felt like air. I scheduled a locksmith for Saturday morning. I told no one. Each night afterward, the house went on as if nothing had shifted. My mother talked about Ivy's upcoming arrival, about paint colors, about where the children's beds would go. Henry commented that transitions like these were healthy. I listened without replying, sipping water at the table, letting their plans drift around me like distant weather. They didn't notice the way I watched them, the way someone studies a place they're preparing to leave behind. I paid attention to their rhythms, their pauses, their small power games, my mother insisting on a certain brand of cereal, Henry adjusting the thermostat without asking. These tiny dominances had once irritated me. Now they informed me. They showed me exactly how much of my life had been shaped inside someone else's frame. On Friday night, the house was strangely still. My mother went to bed early. Henry watched TV with the volume low. I stood at the base of the stairs for a long moment, one hand resting on the rail. This had been my home for years. It had held my exhaustion, my caretaking, my quiet belief that effort created belonging. But belonging had never been part of the structure, only usefulness. I went upstairs, packed the final tote, zipped it calmly, and placed it by the door. No theatrics, no speeches, just completion. At dawn the next morning, with the sky still pale, my mother left to pick up Ivy and the kids from the airport. I watched her car roll out of the driveway from my window, the brake lights blinking once before fading down the street. When the neighborhood fell silent again, I exhaled. The house was finally mine to leave cleanly, and the first step of that departure was simple. I opened the front door, let the cold air sweep through the hallway, and waited for the locksmith to arrive. Tony showed up right on time. The cold morning light glanced off the metal tools on his belt, each one gleaming like a quiet decision. He didn't ask many questions, just confirmed which doors to change, nodded once, and got to work. The old locks came off with a dull scrape, a sound like peeling old wallpaper from a room you no longer live in. By the time he finished, the sun had climbed above the street, warming the driveway in thin stripes. He handed me the new keys. Their weight felt clean, final. "All secure now," he said. "Good," I answered. And it was. Jonah arrived minutes later with his pickup. We loaded the last pieces of my life, my father's bookshelf, 2 suitcases, the tote of documents, into the truck bed. No rush, no panic, just motion, steady and final. When we finished, I stood for a moment in the doorway, looking at the house the way one looks at a stranger in a crowd. Familiar outline, no warmth. We drove to my new apartment. The walls were bare, the air still, the windows catching soft winter light. We set the furniture down. Mira showed up carrying groceries and a lamp. For the first time in years, the room felt like a space that actually belonged to me. That peace lasted all of 9 minutes. My phone lit up on the counter. First a vibration, then another, then a full barrage. Mom calling. Mom calling. Mom calling. Then a message. "Why aren't you opening the door? The key won't turn. What did you do?" Another call followed. Then a third. I didn't pick up. The apartment's hush swallowed the noise as if shielding me. When I finally drove back to the house, I left the car across the street. Their luggage was stacked on the porch. Ivy paced, her children huddled on the steps, shivering. Henry kept testing the handle, yanking it harder with each attempt. My mother's voice spiked in clipped, frantic bursts. All grace had drained from her posture. When she saw me coming, relief flashed across her face. only to be replaced almost instantly by anger. Elena, open this door right now. I paused at the bottom of the stairs. It isn't my responsibility anymore. What is that supposed to mean? Ivy snapped, folding her arms like the chaos on the porch had somehow been my doing. I raised the folder. Payments, bills, contributions, every record of the years I'd kept the house functioning. Marcus, Victoria. Go pack what you need tonight. You're coming home. Everyone else, brunch is over. The Mason family has private business to handle. The aftermath took months. Marcus filed Chapter 7. Lost the house to foreclosure. Entered a 90-day residential gambling addiction program. Victoria stayed barely. They're in weekly marriage counseling, trying to rebuild trust that may never be whole again. The loan sharks were settled. Dad brought in lawyers and negotiators who knocked the debts down to 60 cents on the dollar. Still brutal, but cheaper than broken legs. Marcus is back at work, a smaller firm, smaller salary. He goes to Gamblers Anonymous 3 nights a week. Victoria controls every penny now. He's on a cash-only allowance like a teenager. And me? Still the boring bank analyst in thrift store clothes and a 10-year-old Honda. But I'm also the sister who kept her brother out of federal prison and probably out of a shallow grave. 3 months later, at the next family brunch, Victoria found me before anyone else sat down. I'm sorry, she said quietly. For what I said. For how I treated you. You saved us and I called you a beggar. You didn't know, I answered. I didn't want to know, she corrected. I wanted the perfect life, the big house, the image. I didn't care if it was built on lies. She took a breath. You cared about what was real, even when we treated you like you were nothing. I shrugged. Your family. No, she said, eyes wet. That's what you do. That's what real strength looks like. Not the decorator, not the handbag, not the address. Integrity. Courage to say the hard truth when no one wants to hear it. She hugged me, tight, real, no air kissing. Marcus came over next. Thank you, he said, voice rough. I was too angry, too ashamed to say it before. But thank you for caring enough to stop me when I couldn't stop myself. I hugged him back. You're going to be okay, Marcus. It'll take time, but you'll rebuild, the right way this time. He managed a small smile. With your help. Always, I said. Because that's what family does. Not the fake version that cares about appearances. The real family that cares about POP.